In the frozen wasteland beyond the wall, where the wind howls with the voices of the dead and shadows dance with malevolent purpose, stands a figure that embodies the very essence of ice and darkness. The Night King, an ancient evil that has haunted the nightmares of Westeros for 8,000 years, commands an army of the dead with a single, terrible purpose: the extinction of all life. But in the halls of Winterfell and the corridors of Castle Black, another figure emerges from the mists of prophecy and legend. Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, King in the North, and unknowingly, the last Targaryen heir. Two destinies intertwined by ice and fire, by death and resurrection, by prophecy and blood. The question that haunts every corner of the Seven Kingdoms is not whether these two forces will collide, but whether Jon Snow will be the one to end the Night King's reign of terror, or if he is destined to become the very monster he seeks to destroy. The parallels between Jon Snow and the Night King are not mere coincidence. They are threads in a tapestry woven by the gods themselves, patterns that repeat across millennia like the turning of seasons. Both have died and been brought back to life. Both command the loyalty of those who should be their enemies. Both stand as bridges between worlds, between the living and the dead, between fire and ice. The Night King was once a man transformed by the children of the forest in their desperate bid to save themselves from the first men. Jon Snow was once dead, brought back by the Red Priestess Melisandre through the power of the Lord of Light. Death changed them both, but in what ways? And to what end? Consider the circumstances of Jon's resurrection. When Melisandre performed the ritual that brought him back from the dead, she called upon R'hllor, the Lord of Light, the God of fire and life. Yet fire and ice are not merely opposites in the world of Westeros. They are complementary forces, each defining the other, each necessary for the other's existence. The prophecy of the prince that was promised speaks of one born of ice and fire. And Jon Snow embodies this duality more completely than any other character in the saga. His Stark blood runs cold as winter, while his Targaryen heritage burns with dragonfire. But resurrection comes with a price. And that price may be more than anyone realizes. The ancient texts speak of the long night, when darkness fell across the world and the dead walked among the living. They tell of the last hero who ventured into the heart of winter with only a sword and his companions, seeking to end the threat of the others. Most of his companions died, his horse died, his sword shattered, and still he pressed on. The parallels to Jon's journey are unmistakable. He has lost companions, seen his brothers in the Night's Watch fall, watched as those he loved were torn from him by death and betrayal. His sword, Longclaw, has served him well, but even Valyrian steel may not be enough for what lies ahead. The question is not whether Jon will follow the path of the last hero, but whether he will succeed where the last hero may have failed, or whether he will become something else entirely. The transformation of the Night King offers a chilling precedent. The children of the forest, facing extinction at the hands of the first men, performed a desperate ritual. They bound one of their captives to a weirwood tree and drove a shard of dragonglass into his heart, transforming him into the first White Walker. Their creation was meant to be their salvation, but it became their doom and the doom of all who came after. The Night King turned against his creators, raising an army of the dead and pursuing his own agenda of destruction. This cautionary tale echoes through the ages, a reminder that those who play with forces beyond their understanding often become victims of their own hubris. Jon's resurrection bears troubling similarities to the Night King's creation. Both involve the intervention of mystical forces. Both transformed ordinary men into something more than human. Both imbued their subjects with powers beyond mortal ken. The Night King commands the dead. Jon inspires unwavering loyalty in the living. The Night King is immune to conventional weapons. Jon has survived battles that should have killed him multiple times. The Night King feels no pain, no fear, no human emotion. Jon, since his resurrection, has seemed distant, changed, as if some essential part of his humanity was left behind in death. The signs of Jon's transformation are subtle but persistent. Those who knew him before his death note changes in his demeanor, his speech, his very presence. He speaks less frequently, and when he does, his words carry a weight they never possessed before. His eyes, once warm and expressive, now hold depths that seem to reflect eternity itself. He makes decisions with a cold pragmatism that would have been foreign to the idealistic young man who first took the black. Some attribute these changes to the trauma of death and resurrection, to the burden of leadership, to the terrible knowledge of what lies beyond the wall. But others whisper of darker possibilities. Asterisk, the prophecies speak of Azor Ahai, the legendary hero who wielded the burning sword Lightbringer to end the long night. According to legend, Azor Ahai forged his sword 3 times. The first time, it broke when he tried to temper it in water. The second time, it broke when he tried to temper it by driving it through the heart of a lion. The third time, to forge Lightbringer, he drove the sword through the heart of his beloved wife, Nissa, and her blood and soul and strength and courage all went into the steel. Only then was the sword capable of defeating the darkness. Jon Snow's journey mirrors this legend in disturbing ways. He has already metaphorically forged his sword twice. His time at the wall tempered him in the cold waters of duty and sacrifice. His leadership of the Night's Watch and his battles against the wildlings tempered him through conflict and the heart of the lion, courage and nobility. But the third tempering remains. If Jon is truly Azor Ahai reborn, then he must drive his sword through the heart of one he loves above all others. The candidates are few but significant. Daenerys Targaryen, his aunt and lover. Arya Stark, his beloved sister, or perhaps, in a twist of cruel irony, himself. But what if the prophecy has been misunderstood? What if the sword that must be forged is not Lightbringer, but something else entirely? What if the heart that must be pierced is not that of a beloved, but the heart of the one who would forge the sword? The Night King was created when dragonglass pierced his heart. Jon was resurrected when fire and light pierced the darkness of death. The symmetry is too perfect to be coincidental. Perhaps the true prophecy is not about creating a hero to defeat the darkness, but about creating a new darkness to replace the old. The children of the forest created the Night King as a weapon against the first men, but they lost control of their creation. The Red Priests of R'hllor brought Jon back from the dead as a weapon against the Night King, but they may have equally lost control of theirs. The Lord of Light and the Great Other, fire and ice, life and death, are locked in an eternal struggle. Each move one makes, the other counters. Each weapon one creates, the other seeks to corrupt or destroy. Jon Snow may be the latest piece in this cosmic game, but pieces sometimes become players, and players sometimes change the rules entirely. The evidence for Jon's potential transformation accumulates like snow in a blizzard. His ability to command the loyalty of those who should be his enemies, from former Night's Watch brothers to wildling chiefs, mirrors the Night King's dominion over the dead, his survival of situations that should have been fatal from the battle. At heart, home to the crushing defeat at the Battle of the Bastards suggests that death may no longer hold the same meaning for him. His growing detachment from human emotion and his increasing willingness to make brutal decisions for the greater good echo the cold pragmatism of the White Walkers. Moreover, the magic that flows through Jon's veins is not merely Stark or Targaryen. His resurrection by the Lord of Light has fundamentally altered his essence, binding him to forces beyond the understanding of mortals. Fire magic and ice magic are not separate schools of power, but different aspects of the same fundamental force. The children of the forest who created the Night King, were masters of the old magic, the same magic that flows through the weirwood trees and the wall itself. The Red Priests of R'hllor channel the power of fire and light, but fire and ice are part of the same cycle, the same eternal dance of creation and destruction. The wall itself stands as a monument to this duality. Built by Brandon the Builder with the help of giants and the children of the forest, it is infused with ancient magic that keeps the White Walkers at bay. But magic is not inherently good or evil, it simply is. The same power that protects the realm from the others could just as easily be turned to their purpose. Jon's time as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch placed him in direct contact with this ancient magic. He lived within. The wall walked its length, felt its power in his bones. When he died and was resurrected, that magic may have claimed him as much as the fire of R'hllor. The significance of Jon's parentage cannot be overlooked in this context. As the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, he is literally the product of ice and fire, the living embodiment of the song that gives the saga its name. But this duality may be his doom as much as his destiny. The Targaryens were masters of fire and dragons, but they were also prone to madness, to the corruption that comes from wielding too much power. The Starks were children of winter, tied to the old gods and the ancient magic of the north, but they were also bound by oaths and honor that could lead to their destruction. Jon's resurrection has awakened both sides of his heritage. The fire of his Targaryen blood burns stronger than ever, evident in his ability to ride dragons and his immunity to flame. But the ice of his Stark blood runs deeper, connecting him to the old gods, to the weirwood trees, and to the ancient magic that the Night King also commands. This duality makes him uniquely qualified to understand both sides of the coming conflict, but it also makes him vulnerable to corruption by either force. The dreams that plague Jon since his resurrection offer further evidence of his changing nature. He speaks of dreams of ice and darkness, of walking through halls of the dead, of voices calling to him from beyond the wall. These are not the dreams of a living man, but of something caught between worlds, something that belongs neither to the realm of the living nor the dead. The Night King, too, exists in this liminal space, commanding the dead while retaining memories of life, bridging the gap between existence and oblivion. The Red Priests and Priestesses who serve the Lord of Light have their own interpretation of Jon's role in the prophecy. They see him as Azor, High Reborn, the prince that was promised, the one who will lead the living against the dead. But their understanding is colored by their devotion to their God, their belief that fire must triumph over ice, that light must banish darkness. They fail to see that in the eternal struggle between opposing forces, victory for one side means only temporary ascendancy, not permanent triumph. The wheel turns, the seasons change, and ice follows fire, as surely as night follows day. The faceless men of Braavos, servants of the many-faced God, understand death differently than the priests of R'hllor. To them, death is not the enemy, but the natural end of all things, the gift that makes life meaningful. Their God has many faces because death comes in many forms, but it always comes. They would view Jon's resurrection not as a triumph over death, but as an abomination, a denial of the natural order. And they would be right to be concerned, for when the natural order is disrupted, the consequences ripple outward like waves on a pond. The three-eyed raven, the last green seer, sees all of time as a single tapestry, past and future woven together in patterns that repeat and echo across the ages. From his perspective, Jon's fate is not predetermined, but it is constrained by the patterns of the past. The Night King was created in response to a threat, became a threat himself, and now must be dealt with by someone who understands both sides of the conflict. Jon's journey from bastard to Lord Commander to King parallels the Night King's journey from man to monster to ruler of the dead. The question is whether Jon will complete the cycle or break it. The role of Daenerys Targaryen in Jon's potential transformation cannot be ignored. She too is a product of fire and blood, a wielder of dragons and a breaker of chains. Her love for Jon and his for her creates a bond that transcends politics and prophecy. But love can be a weakness as much as a strength, and the Night King has no such vulnerabilities. If Jon is to become the new Night King, he must shed his human attachments, his capacity for love and compassion and mercy. The loss of Daenerys, whether through death or betrayal or transformation, could be the catalyst that completes his metamorphosis. The children of the forest, who still exist in small numbers beyond the wall, remember the creation of the Night King and the mistake they made in thinking they could control him. They see in Jon Snow the potential for the same error, the same hubris that led to their near extinction. But they also see in him the possibility of redemption, the chance to undo the damage they caused 8,000 years ago. Their guidance could be crucial in determining whether Jon becomes the savior of the realm or its greatest threat. The wildlings, free folk beyond the wall, have their own perspective on the coming conflict. They understand better than most that the wall is not just a barrier, but a symbol, a representation of the division between civilization and wilderness, between order and chaos, between life and death. Jon's acceptance of them, his willingness to bring them south of the wall, has already begun to break down these divisions. But in breaking down barriers, he may also be breaking down the very foundations that keep the realm stable. The Maesters of the Citadel, with their dedication to knowledge and learning, would approach Jon's transformation from a different angle. They would seek to understand the mechanism of his resurrection, the source of his changed nature, the implications for the balance of power in the realm. Their chains of office symbolize their dedication to different areas of study, but no chain is stronger than its weakest link. And their understanding of magic and prophecy is limited by their skepticism and their adherence to rational thought. The High Sparrow and the Faith Militant, before their destruction, saw Jon's resurrection as either a miracle of the Seven or an abomination against the natural order. Their interpretation would depend on whether they viewed him as a force for good or evil, a savior of the faithful or a herald of the apocalypse. The common people of Westeros, caught between warring kings and ancient threats, would see in Jon either their salvation or their doom, depending on how his story unfolds. The Iron Bank of Braavos, concerned primarily with the stability of the realm and the repayment of debts, would view Jon's potential transformation in terms of its impact on trade and commerce. A Night King ruling over the dead would have little need for gold or silver, little interest in contracts or obligations. The economic implications of such a transformation would be catastrophic, leading to the collapse of the entire financial system that underlies civilization in Westeros and beyond. The Dothraki, who follow strength above all else, would respect Jon's power regardless of its source. If he becomes the Night King, they would likely follow him as they followed Daenerys, drawn by his ability to command and conquer. Their understanding of magic is limited, but their understanding of power is absolute. They would not question the morality of his transformation, only its effectiveness. The unsullied, trained from birth to obey without question, would face a crisis of loyalty if Jon were to transform into the Night King. Their dedication to Daenerys is absolute, but their respect for Jon is also strong. They would be torn between conflicting loyalties, forced to choose between their queen and the man she loves, between fire and ice, between life and death. The Second Sons and other mercenary companies would approach Jon's transformation pragmatically, weighing the benefits of serving a potentially immortal ruler against the risks of opposing the living. Their loyalty is to gold and survival, not to abstract principles of good and evil. If Jon becomes the Night King but offers them safety and profit, they would likely serve him as readily as they served any other employer. Asterisk the religious orders of Westeros. From the septons of the seven to the priests of the old gods would struggle to reconcile Jon's transformation with their theological understanding. Is he a savior sent by the gods or a demon risen from the depths of hell? Is his power divine or infernal? Their interpretations would shape the response of the faithful, determining whether Jon is embraced as a Messiah or rejected as a false prophet. The small folk, the common people who bear the brunt of every war and conflict, would care less about the source of Jon's power than its effects on their daily lives. If he brings peace and stability, they would welcome him regardless of his nature. If he brings death and destruction, they would oppose him even if he claims to act in their name. Their pragmatic approach to survival would cut through the complexities of prophecy and magic to focus on the simple question of whether their lives are better or worse under his rule. The Night's Watch, the organization that shaped Jon's early adulthood and claimed his loyalty, would face the ultimate test if he were to become the Night King. Their ancient vows speak of being the sword in the darkness, the watchers on the wall, the shield that guards the realms of men. But what happens when one of their own becomes the very threat they were created to guard against? Would they stand against him, or would they see in his transformation the fulfillment of their deeper purpose? The history of the Night's Watch is filled with cautionary tales of brothers who fell to temptation, who abandoned their vows, who turned against their sworn brothers. The tale of the Night's King, the 13th Lord Commander, who fell in love with a woman with cold white skin and bright blue eyes, serves as a warning of what can happen when a brother of the Watch is corrupted by the very forces he is meant to oppose. Jon's story echoes this ancient tale in disturbing ways, suggesting that history may be repeating itself with variations, but the same ultimate outcome. The political implications of Jon's potential transformation extend far beyond the immediate threat to the Seven Kingdoms. The entire feudal system of Westeros is based on the assumption that rulers are mortal, that dynasties rise and fall, that power eventually passes to new hands. An immortal Night King would represent a fundamental challenge to this system, permanent disruption of the natural order that governs succession and inheritance. The great houses of Westeros, from the Starks of Winterfell to the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, have spent centuries building their power and influence through careful marriages, strategic alliances, and the accumulation of wealth and resources. But what value would these advantages have against an immortal ruler who commands the power of life and death itself? The entire structure of noble society would collapse under the weight of such a transformation. The question of legitimacy would become meaningless in the face of absolute power. Jon's claim to the Iron Throne through his Targaryen heritage would be irrelevant if he possessed the ability to simply take what he wanted through force. The complex web of laws and customs that govern succession would be swept away. Like dust before a hurricane, the impact on the faith of the Seven would be equally profound. The religion that has shaped the moral and ethical framework of Westerosi society for centuries teaches that the gods reward the just and punish the wicked. That virtue is ultimately triumphant over vice. But what happens to faith when confronted with a power that transcends traditional notions of good and evil? How do believers reconcile their understanding of divine justice with the rise of a ruler who embodies both salvation and damnation? The old gods of the north, the nameless deities worshipped at weirwood trees and sacred groves, would face a different crisis. These gods are associated with the natural world, with the cycle of seasons, with the balance between life and death. Jon's transformation into the Night King would represent either the fulfillment of the old god's will or a perversion of it, depending on one's interpretation of the ancient texts and prophecies. The Lord of Light, whose priests brought Jon back from the dead, would claim responsibility for his transformation regardless of its outcome. If he becomes a savior, they would praise their god's wisdom and power. If he becomes a destroyer, they would claim that the darkness had to be purged. Before the light could triumph, the Red religion's emphasis on the eternal struggle between fire and ice. Light and darkness, good and evil, provides a framework for understanding Jon's transformation that other faiths lack. The economic consequences of Jon's potential transformation would ripple throughout the known world. The Seven Kingdoms are major players in international trade, exporting grain, wine, metals, and other goods to the free cities of Essos and beyond. The disruption caused by an undead ruler would affect not only Westeros, but also the global economy, potentially triggering famines, wars, and the collapse of entire civilizations. The free cities of Essos, from Braavos to Volantis, would have to decide how to respond to the rise of a Night King in Westeros. Some might see an opportunity to exploit the chaos and expand their own influence. Others might view the threat as existential, requiring a coordinated response to prevent the spread of undeath to their own territories. The political balance that has maintained relative peace between the free cities could be shattered by the need to address this unprecedented challenge. The Dothraki Sea, vast grasslands inhabited by nomadic horse warriors, would present a different set of challenges for a potential Night King. The Dothraki have no permanent settlements to conquer, no fixed territories to control. Their mobility and warrior culture would make them difficult to defeat through conventional military means. But their horses would be vulnerable to the cold that follows the White Walkers, and their shamans might possess knowledge of magic that could be turned against the undead. The slave cities of Slaver's Bay, recently liberated by Daenerys Targaryen, would face a cruel irony if Jon were to become the Night King. They would be forced to choose between the freedom they have fought so hard to achieve and the security that might come from submitting to an immortal ruler. The former slaves who now govern these cities would have to weigh their hard-won independence against the potential benefits of joining a power that could protect them from their former masters. The Summer Isles, with their rich culture and advanced knowledge of medicine and astronomy, might possess insights into the nature of Jon's transformation that others lack. Their isolation from the main continent has allowed them to preserve ancient knowledge that has been lost elsewhere. They might hold the key to understanding the prophecies that surround Jon's fate, or they might possess the weapons needed to stop him if he becomes a threat. The mystical city of Ashai, where shadows dance and sorcerers study forbidden arts, would be a natural ally or enemy of a transformed Jon Snow. The practitioners of shadow magic who dwell there understand the balance between life and death, light and darkness, in ways that others do not. They might see Jon's transformation as the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, or they might view it as a perversion of the natural order that must be corrected. The faceless men of Braavos, servants of the many-faced god, would have their own unique perspective on Jon's potential transformation. As assassins who serve death itself, they would understand better than most the implications of someone who has died and returned to life. They might see Jon as a fellow servant of their god, or they might view him as an abomination that defies the natural order and must be eliminated. Asterisk, the Iron Bank of Braavos, would approach the situation with their characteristic pragmatism, calculating the costs and benefits of supporting or opposing a potential Night King. Their vast wealth gives them influence throughout the known world, and their decisions could determine the outcome of any conflict. If they see Jon as a threat to the stability that allows them to collect their debts, they would marshal their resources against him. If they see him as a force for order, they might become his most powerful allies. Asterisk, the religious movements that have shaped the history of Essos would also be affected by Jon's transformation. The followers of the many-faced god, the Lord of Light, the Weeping Woman of Lys, and other deities would each interpret his rise according to their own theological frameworks. Some might see him as a divine messenger, others as a demonic influence. Their responses would shape the religious landscape of the known world for generations to come. The implications for magic itself would be equally profound. Throughout history, magic has waxed and waned, sometimes powerful and prevalent, other times weak and rare. The return of dragons to the world has already begun to strengthen magical forces, but the rise of a new Night King would represent a fundamental shift in the balance of mystical power. Sorcerers, priests, and other practitioners of magic would find their abilities enhanced or diminished depending on their allegiances and the nature of their arts. Asterisk, the children of the forest, who created the original Night King, would face the consequences of their ancient mistake in a new form. If Jon becomes the Night King, they would have to decide whether to accept responsibility for another monster of their creation or to take action to prevent history from repeating itself. Their magic is older and deeper than that of men, but it is also tied to the natural world in ways that might make it vulnerable to the power of undeath. The weirwood trees, which serve as repositories of memory and conduits for the old gods, would play a crucial role in any such transformation. These ancient trees have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the coming and going of ice ages, the endless cycle of life and death. They might hold the key to understanding Jon's true destiny, or they might themselves be corrupted by the power he represents. The wall itself, that great barrier of ice and magic, would take on new significance if Jon were to become the Night King, built to keep the White Walkers out of the Seven Kingdoms. It might instead become a prison to keep a transformed Jon in, or it might be destroyed entirely, its purpose fulfilled in a way its builders never intended. The Night's Watch, that ancient brotherhood sworn to guard the realms of men, would face its ultimate test. Created to stand against the darkness beyond the wall, they would have to confront the possibility that one of their own had become that darkness incarnate. Their vows speak of service until death, but what happens when death is no longer the end of service? The great families of Westeros would have to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about power, legitimacy, and survival. The Starks, who claimed Jon as their own, would be torn between blood loyalty and the greater good. The Targaryens, represented by Daenerys, would face the question of whether dragonfire could burn away the ice that might claim their last male heir. The Lannisters, masters of political calculation, would have to decide whether to oppose or attempt to manipulate a power beyond their understanding. The common people of Westeros, who have suffered through years of war and hardship, would face the ultimate test of their endurance. They have survived the War of the Five Kings, the threat of the White Walkers, and the burning of King's Landing. But could they survive the rule of an immortal king who might view them as subjects, resources, or potential recruits for his undead army? The question of Jon's potential transformation is not merely one of individual fate, but of the fundamental nature of power itself. Throughout the saga, we have seen how power corrupts, how even the best intentions can lead to terrible consequences, how the pursuit of the greater good can justify the most heinous acts. Jon's journey from bastard to king has been marked by moral compromises, difficult choices, and the gradual erosion of his idealistic worldview. The Night King represents the ultimate expression of power divorced from humanity, of authority without compassion, of rule without responsibility to the ruled. If Jon were to become the Night King, he would embody the very thing he has spent his life fighting against. The irony would be complete. The man who sought to protect the realm from the darkness would become the darkness itself. But perhaps this transformation would not be entirely negative. The Night King, for all his terrible power, brings a kind of order to the chaos of existence. Under his rule, there would be no war, no famine, no disease, no suffering of the kind that has plagued humanity throughout history. Death would be the ultimate equalizer, making lords and peasants, knights and merchants, all the same in the end. The peace of the grave might be preferable to the endless cycle of conflict that has defined the Seven Kingdoms. This darker interpretation of Jon's potential fate suggests that his transformation into the Night King might be not a tragedy, but a mercy. Not a fall from grace, but an ascension to a higher purpose. The living world, with all its pain and suffering, its inequalities and injustices, would be replaced by a realm where such concerns no longer matter. The dead do not hunger, do not feel pain, do not know fear or hatred or despair. Yet this interpretation raises profound questions about the nature of existence itself. Is a life without suffering worth living if it is also a life without joy, without love, without hope? Is the peace of death preferable to the chaos of life? These are the questions that Jon would have to grapple with if he were to undergo such a transformation. And they are questions that have no easy answers. The prophecies that surround Jon's fate are themselves ambiguous, open to multiple interpretations. The prince that was promised could be a savior or a destroyer, depending on one's perspective. Azor Ahai could be the hero who ends the long night or the one who brings it about. The Song of Ice and Fire could be a harmony that brings balance to the world or a discord that tears it apart. The ambiguity of these prophecies is not accidental, but intentional, reflecting the complex and often contradictory nature of fate itself. Prophecies in the world of Westeros are not fixed destinies, but possibilities, potential futures that can be shaped by the choices of those who hear them. Jon's knowledge of his potential fate gives him the power to fulfill it or subvert it, to embrace his destiny or forge a new one. The role of free will in Jon's story cannot be understated. Despite the weight of prophecy and the influence of supernatural forces, he remains a character capable of choice. Every decision he makes, from his initial choice to join the Night's Watch to his eventual choice regarding his ultimate fate, shapes not only his own destiny, but the destiny of the entire world. This emphasis on choice is crucial too. Understanding the true nature of Jon's potential transformation. He would not become the Night King through some inevitable cosmic process, but through a series of decisions, each building upon the last, each narrowing the range of possibilities until only one path remains. The tragedy of such a transformation would lie not in its inevitability, but in its voluntariness, not in the failure of free will, but in its ultimate expression. The question of what Jon would choose, given full knowledge of the consequences, remains open. Would he sacrifice his humanity to save the realm, even if that salvation came in a form that no one could recognize or appreciate? Would he accept the burden of a mortal rule, knowing that he would be forever isolated from the warmth of human connection? Would he embrace the power to end all suffering, even if it meant ending all joy as well? These questions cannot be answered definitively because they touch upon the deepest mysteries of human nature. They force us to confront our own assumptions about good and evil, about the value of individual freedom versus collective security, about the price we are willing to pay for peace. Jon's potential transformation into the Night King serves as a mirror in which we see reflected our own fears and desires, our own capacity for both salvation and damnation. The ultimate resolution of Jon's fate will depend not only on his own choices, but on the choices of those around him. Daenerys, with her dragons and her armies, could either support his transformation or oppose it. Arya, with her skills as a faceless man, could either aid him or attempt to stop him. Bran, with his powers as the three-eyed raven, could either guide him toward his destiny or help him escape it. The interconnectedness of these characters' fates reflects the broader theme of the saga, that individual actions have far-reaching consequences, that the personal is political, that private choices shape public outcomes. Jon's transformation would not occur in isolation, but would be the result of a complex web of relationships, alliances, and conflicts that bind all the characters together. The timing of any such transformation would also be crucial. If Jon were to become the Night King early in the conflict with the White Walkers, he might be able to prevent the worst of the destruction by bringing the war to a swift conclusion. If the transformation were to occur later, after extensive damage had already been done, it might be seen as too little, too late. A Pyrrhic victory that leaves the realm in ruins. The manner of the transformation would also matter. Would it be a gradual process, allowing Jon to retain some of his humanity even as he gains the power of the Night King? Would it be sudden and complete, erasing all traces of the man he once was? Would it be reversible, offering the possibility of redemption, or permanent, sealing his fate for all eternity? These details would determine not only the nature of Jon's rule, but also the response of his subjects. A Night King who retains some vestige of human compassion might be more acceptable to the living than one who had abandoned all connection to his former self. A transformation that could be undone might be viewed as a temporary sacrifice rather than a permanent loss. The legacy of such a transformation would echo through the ages, shaping the myths and legends that future generations would tell about the events of this time. Jon's story would become a cautionary tale about the dangers of power, a tragedy about the price of heroism, or an epic about the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good. Depending on how the transformation was perceived and remembered, the impact on the genre of fantasy literature itself would also be significant. The trope of the hero's journey, the expectation that good will triumph over evil, the assumption that protagonists will find a way to achieve victory without compromise, would all be challenged by Jon's transformation into the very enemy he sought to defeat. This subversion of expectations would force readers to confront their own assumptions about storytelling and morality. The influence on other characters' development would be equally profound. Daenerys might be driven to madness by the loss of the man she loves, leading to the destruction of King's Landing that has already been foreshadowed. Tyrion might be forced to choose between his loyalty to Daenerys and his recognition that Jon's transformation might be necessary for the realms. Survival Sansa might have to decide whether to support her brother's new form or to lead the resistance against him. The religious implications would reverberate throughout the known world. The followers of the Lord of Light would have to reconcile their belief in their god's benevolence with the transformation of his chosen champion into an agent of death. The worshippers of the old gods would have to decide whether Jon's transformation represents the fulfillment of ancient prophecies or their perversion. The faith of the Seven would struggle to understand how their theology of justice and redemption could account for such a fundamental challenge to the natural order. The psychological toll on Jon himself, should he retain any awareness during such a transformation, would be unimaginable. To become the very thing he has spent his life fighting against, to wield the power he has always feared, to rule over subjects who once looked to him for protection from the very fate he now represents, would create a form of torment that transcends physical suffering. The isolation would be absolute, the burden beyond human comprehension. Yet there is another possibility, one that the prophecies hint at but do not explicitly state. What if Jon's transformation into the Night King is not the end of his story, but the beginning of a new chapter? What if the power of the Night King, combined with Jon's essential humanity and his connection to both ice and fire, could be used not to destroy the world, but to remake it? The Night King's ability to raise the dead could be turned to different purposes if guided by a will that remembers what it means to be human. Consider the implications of a Night King who retains his capacity for love, for mercy, for justice. The dead he raises might not be mindless servants, but restored souls, given a second chance at existence. The eternal winter he brings might not be a season of death, but of renewal. A time for the world to rest and heal from the wounds inflicted by centuries of war and exploitation. The silence he imposes might not be the silence of the grave, but the silence of peace. This interpretation suggests that Jon's potential transformation represents not a fall from grace, but an evolution, not a corruption, but a transcendence. boy who was mocked as a bastard, who struggled with questions of identity and belonging, who sought to prove himself worthy of love and respect, would finally find his place in the world by accepting a role that no one else could fill. He would become the bridge between life and death, a mediator between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The evidence for this more hopeful interpretation can be found in Jon's character throughout his journey, even in his darkest moments, even when making the hardest decisions. He has retained his fundamental decency, his concern for those who cannot protect themselves, his willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. These qualities would not necessarily disappear with his transformation, but might instead be amplified, applied on a scale that encompasses not just the 7 kingdoms, but the entire world. The Night King's greatest weakness has always been his inability to truly understand the living, his disconnect from the emotions and motivations that drive human behavior. A Night King who had once been human, who retained memories of love and loss, hope and fear, would be far more effective than his predecessor. He would understand not only how to command the dead, but how to govern the living, how to create a world where both could coexist. The practical advantages of such a ruler would be immense. The petty squabbles between houses and kingdoms that have torn Westeros apart for generations would become irrelevant in the face of immortal authority. The waste of resources on warfare could be redirected toward healing the land, feeding the hungry, and protecting the vulnerable. The cycle of revenge and retaliation that has defined noble politics could finally be broken. But the cost of such benefits would be the fundamental transformation of human society itself. Free will, individual autonomy, the right to dissent, and rebel. All of these cherished aspects of human existence would be subordinated to the greater good as defined by an immortal ruler. The question becomes whether such a trade-off is acceptable, whether peace and prosperity are worth the price of freedom. This dilemma reflects broader questions about the nature of governance and the social contract. Throughout history, humans have struggled to balance the need for order and security with the desire for liberty and self-determination. Jon's potential transformation as the Night King represents the ultimate expression of this tension, a solution that promises perfect order at the cost of perfect submission. The reaction of the various factions and characters to such a transformation would reveal their true priorities and values. Those who have suffered most from the chaos of war might welcome a ruler who could guarantee peace, even at the cost of freedom. Those who have benefited from the existing system of competition and conflict might resist, preferring the uncertainties of liberty to the certainties of servitude. Daenerys Targaryen, with her own complicated relationship with power and her role as a breaker of chains, would face perhaps the most difficult choice of all. Would she support Jon's transformation if it meant ending suffering and injustice, even if it also meant ending the freedom she has fought so hard to establish? Or would she oppose him, even if that opposition meant the continuation of a system that perpetuates inequality and pain? The dragons themselves would play a crucial role in any such conflict. As creatures of fire and magic, they represent the antithesis of the ice and death that the Night King embodies. Yet they are also bound to their riders by bonds that transcend simple loyalty. If Daenerys were to oppose Jon's transformation, the dragons might be torn between their natural opposition to his power and their recognition of his connection to their bloodline. The children of Jon and Daenerys, should they have any, would inherit a world shaped by their parents' choices. They would be living symbols of the union between ice and fire, potentially possessing abilities that combine the best aspects of both elements. Their very existence might offer a path forward that avoids the extremes of either absolute order or chaotic freedom. The Stark family, with their motto of "Winter is coming," would face the ultimate test of their worldview. For generations, they have prepared for the harsh realities of winter, teaching their children that survival depends on endurance, loyalty, and acceptance of difficult truths. Jon's transformation into the Night King would represent the arrival of the ultimate winter, but it would also vindicate their long-held belief that preparation and acceptance are preferable to denial and wishful thinking. Arya Stark, with her training as a faceless man and her intimate knowledge of death, would understand better than most the implications of Jon's transformation. Her ability to change faces, to become someone else entirely, mirrors the fundamental change that Jon would undergo. She might see his transformation not as a loss of identity, but as the ultimate expression of it. The final step in a journey toward becoming who he was always meant to be. Sansa Stark, with her hard-won political wisdom and her understanding of power's corrupting influence, would approach Jon's transformation with skepticism and caution. She has seen how even well-intentioned rulers can become tyrants, how the pursuit of the greater good can justify terrible acts. Her response would likely be shaped by pragmatic considerations rather than emotional attachments. Bran Stark, as the three-eyed raven, would see Jon's transformation within the broader context of time and fate, perspective encompassing past, present, and future, would allow him to understand the necessity of Jon's choice, even if he could not approve of it. His role might be to serve as a guide and counselor, helping Jon navigate the complexities of his new existence while maintaining some connection to his humanity. The Night's Watch, that ancient brotherhood, sworn to guard the realms of men, would face an existential crisis. Their oaths speak of serving as the sword in the darkness. But what happens when one of their own becomes the darkness itself? Some might see Jon's transformation as the ultimate fulfillment of their purpose, the final victory over the forces they were created to oppose. Others might view it as the ultimate betrayal, a perversion of everything they have sworn to uphold. The wildlings, who have always lived beyond the wall and outside the structures of civilization, might adapt more easily to Jon's transformed rule than the more civilized Southerners. Their understanding of survival and their acceptance of harsh realities would serve them well in a world governed by the Night King. They might even thrive under such rule, finding in it the order and protection that their harsh environment has always denied them. The Maesters of the Citadel, with their dedication to knowledge and learning, would be faced with the challenge of understanding and documenting a form of existence that defies their rational worldview. Their chains of office, each link representing mastery of a different field of study, would need new links to account for the study of death and undeath, of transformation and transcendence. The economic implications of Jon's transformation would extend far beyond the immediate disruption of existing power structures. The traditional economy, based on scarcity, competition, and the need to accumulate resources for survival, would become irrelevant in a world where death is no longer the ultimate threat. New forms of value and exchange would need to be developed based perhaps on knowledge, creativity, or spiritual fulfillment rather than material wealth. The cultural impact would be equally profound. Art, literature, music, and other forms of human expression have always been shaped by the awareness of mortality, by the knowledge that life is finite and precious. A world ruled by an immortal Night King would need new forms of culture that reflect different concerns and priorities. The songs of ice and fire would give way to new melodies, new stories, new ways of understanding human experience. The technological implications would also be significant. The pursuit of knowledge and innovation has often been driven by the desire to overcome human limitations, to extend life, to reduce suffering, to increase comfort and security. In a world where these goals have been achieved through supernatural means, the direction of technological development would necessarily change. New challenges would emerge, requiring new solutions and new forms of ingenuity. The environmental consequences of Jon's transformation would depend largely on how he chose to exercise his power. The eternal winter associated with the White Walkers could be devastating to ecosystems adapted to seasonal change. but it could also provide relief to lands suffering from overuse and exploitation. The balance between preservation and transformation would become a key aspect of his rule. The international implications would reverberate throughout the known world. The free cities of Essos, the Summer Isles, the distant lands of Yi Ti and Ashai, all would need to respond to the emergence of a new form of government in Westeros. Some might seek to emulate Jon's transformation. Others might band together to oppose it. The balance of power that is maintained relative. Stability across the narrow sea would be permanently altered. The question of succession would take on new meaning in the context of an immortal ruler. Traditional concepts of inheritance and dynasty would become irrelevant. But new questions would arise about the continuity of leadership and the mechanisms for change and adaptation. How would an immortal society govern itself? How would it respond to new challenges and opportunities? How would it avoid the stagnation that might come with eternal rule? The philosophical implications would be perhaps the most profound of all. Questions about the nature of existence, the meaning of life and death, the relationship between individual and society would all need to be reconsidered in light of Jon's transformation. The great thinkers and teachers of the world would be challenged to develop new frameworks for understanding human experience in a fundamentally changed reality. The psychological effects on the general population would vary widely depending on individual temperament and circumstances. Some might find comfort in the certainty and security that Jon's rule would provide, while others might struggle with the loss of freedom and self-determination. The process of adaptation would likely be gradual, extending over generations as new norms and expectations took root. The role of memory would become crucial in maintaining continuity with the past while adapting to the present. Jon's own memories of his human existence would serve as a bridge between the old world and the new, helping to preserve what was valuable while discarding what was harmful. The collective memory of society would need to be carefully tended to. Ensure that the lessons of history were not lost in the transformation. The question of resistance would inevitably arise. Not everyone would accept Jon's transformation willingly, and some would undoubtedly organize opposition to his rule. The nature of this resistance would depend largely on how Jon chose to exercise his power and respond to dissent. A Night King who ruled with compassion and wisdom might face less opposition than one who governed through fear and intimidation. The possibility of redemption would remain a constant theme throughout Jon's transformed existence. The question of whether his transformation could be reversed, whether he could reclaim his humanity without losing his power, whether he could find a way to bridge the gap between life and death, would continue to shape his actions and the actions of those around him. The hope for redemption might provide the motivation needed to navigate the challenges of his new existence. The cyclical nature of the world of ice and fire suggests that Jon's transformation, however permanent it might seem, would itself be part of a larger pattern. Seasons change, ages end, new eras begin. The Night King's rule might last for millennia, but it would not last forever. The question becomes not whether change will come, but what form it will take and whether it will represent progress or regression. The legacy of Jon's choice would extend far beyond his own lifetime or the immediate consequences of his transformation. Future generations would judge his decision based on its long-term effects, its contribution to human flourishing or suffering, its role in advancing or retarding the cause of justice and peace. The weight of history would bear down on his choice, making it not just a personal decision, but a defining moment for all of humanity. The story of Jon Snow's potential transformation into the Night King serves as a mirror for our own struggles with power, responsibility, and the difficult choices that define us. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the price of peace, the value of freedom, the nature of sacrifice, and the meaning of heroism. In contemplating his fate, we contemplate our own, and in understanding his choices, we better Understand ourselves the ambiguity that surrounds Jon's destiny is not a flaw in the storytelling, but its greatest strength. By refusing to provide easy answers or clear moral guidance, the saga forces us to grapple with complexity, to embrace uncertainty, to find our own way through the darkness. Jon's journey from bastard to potential Night King is our journey from innocence to experience, from simplicity to complexity, from certainty to doubt. In the end, the question of whether Jon Snow will end the Night King's reign or become the next Night King may be less important than the questions his story raises about power, duty, sacrifice, and the human condition. His fate serves as a lens through which we can examine our own values, our own choices, and our own capacity for both good and evil. Whether he becomes a savior or a destroyer, a hero or a villain, his story will endure as a testament to the complexity of human nature and the difficulty of the choices that define us. The winds of winter blow cold across the battlements of Winterfell, carrying with them the scent of snow and the promise of change. In the Great Hall, where the kings of winter once held court, where the Starks have ruled for thousands of years, a new chapter in the long history of the North is about to be written. The question is not whether it will be written in ink or blood, in triumph or tragedy, but whether those who come after will understand the necessity of the choices made in the darkness. When the fate of the world hung in the balance and heroes were forced to become monsters to save those they loved. The night is dark and full of terrors, but it is also full of possibilities. In the space between light and shadow, between ice and fire, between life and death, lies the truth of Jon Snow's destiny. Whether that truth leads to salvation or damnation, to the end of the long night or its eternal continuation, remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the choices made in the coming days will echo through the ages, shaping the world for generations yet unborn, determining whether the Song of Ice and Fire ends in harmony or discord, in hope or despair, in the triumph of love over hate or the victory of winter over all. Asterisk, the stage is set. The players are in position, and the final act of this great drama is about to begin. The question that began this tale remains unanswered, hanging in the cold air like breath made visible by winter's touch. Will Jon Snow end the Night King's reign, or will he become the next Night King? The answer lies not in prophecy or fate, but in the choices yet to be made, in the crucible of the coming darkness where heroes are forged and legends are born. The wheel turns, the game continues, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of approaching footsteps echoes through the snow, carrying with them the promise of an ending that no one can foresee and everyone will remember.